everyone. My name is Dave Glasgow from IP Integration, and welcome and thank you for sparing the time to join this webinar. I'm going to do a quick story before we start, because doubtless there'll be a number of people that will be struggling with their microphone, with their video camera and whatever. And it has a bit of relevance, and it's about my 100-year-old upright pink piano. And a few weeks ago, you'll remember that hairdressing became a profession that could practice again. And I live with 3 daughters in their late teens and my wife, and they were very pleased about this fact. And so the hairdresser had been arranged, she came along. It normally is an 8-hour session. So I don't know, highlights, lowlights, whatever happens, but it's 8 hours. And on this instance, Gemma, the hairdresser, had childcare problems and brought along with her 3-year-old daughter. And amusing a 3-year-old for 8 hours is quite a tough gig, and it didn't take too long, because this thing's huge and pink, for her to see the piano and want to, I would say play a tune, but it was more bash the ivories really. And so the noise was pretty strong, and amazing how loud they are. And I was on a Teams call, an internal one, and I poked my head around the corner and sort of looked quizzically. And Gemma kind of got the message. So she said to her daughter, she said, "Oh, you're going to have to stop playing. You're going to have to stop playing now, because it's going to have to get charged. You're going to have to recharge the piano." And I kind of, well, firstly, her daughter unquestionably just accepted that the piano needed charging and stopped playing. And for me, it brought home 2 things, and it's a very loose segue into today. But one, and I sound old, about youth, and you know, everything's into a digital HD interface kind of thing. So charging things is clearly very relevant to them. And the other was, I really wouldn't have thought as an approach to stop a 3-year-old making noises that were not particularly acceptable. So it's a different way of looking at things. And today, I think we're hopefully going to cover those sort of aspects really. So we've got no slides, we've got no polls. This is, and it was positioned always as an informal gathering of friends. So the panel here are people that I've worked with for generally a long time, and collectively have probably over 100 years of experience in the contact center industry. And I think what's really helpful is that they all have a different lens, if you like, into the contact center. So from their different backgrounds and their professions and so forth. But all of those are very complementary, I think. So today will be, I think, fascinating in terms of hearing about their experiences. So we're going to touch on what happened, and we're broadly all very familiar with that, because it touched us in our work lives and our home lives. But that paints a sort of picture and a canvas of the things that we needed to do. We'll look at what became important in terms of the transformation and the transitions that were needed to be made. And along the way, look and listen to some of the successes and learnings that people experience. So what will you get? Well, hopefully you'll get a validation that maybe some of those decisions that were very difficult to make were the right ones to make, and that other people have been along that same journey. You're obviously going to hear some interesting and relevant experiences about success and good fortune and issues and so forth. We'll hopefully create a few light bulb moments, for people to take away and think, yeah, well, why don't we do that? And I think importantly, provide some comfort that the outlook isn't just about CX. And there's so much, and so many webinars actually, where it's drilled in about CX, and there are so many other aspects, and we're going to talk and cover those today as well. So I'm going to make my intro. So hopefully you will have read the bios of the people on the panel today. But I'm going to do my own intro to those people, and hopefully not sound too sycophantic. But so Jason, I need to thank you, I think, because we typically talk at 7:30 in the morning, and there's 2 things that happen. You talk with a smile, so we always end up having a laugh about something, and that's a great way to start the day. And equally, your background and your expertise means that when we start talking about a problem or a challenge or an area in the contact center, you always have some different view that I would not have expected or thought. You see things differently. And so I get great value from that. And so thank you for that, and welcome. So Natalie, so we've worked together, I think. We've known each other for many years. You've been a great supporter to me and to IPI. And I would say you have this amazing ability to absorb huge amounts of information, data, and knowledge, filter out the stuff that we don't need, and then relay it back or present it. And when I say presenting is a real skill. It's very difficult for people, many people to do. And you're able to do it passionately and in a way that engages people. And so great to have you on board. I know you're very busy, but it's great to have you on board in terms of that market. So hi. MJ, so I think it was a week ago today that we were sat in a restaurant in Manchester, enjoying two of my favorite things really. So one is pizza, and I love pizza, Naples style, obviously. And the second was really talking to you, and I always love hearing of your experience in terms of building enterprise contact center businesses for sale, and for the focus and the experience you have in all of those operational areas, so the people, process, technology, and I suppose in a particular sector which is very relevant to the conversation today. So we need to do much more of that, particularly the pizza. So welcome, MJ. And then to Julian. So we tend to find that our strongest customer advocates are also the ones that hold us most clearly to account. And you've been a customer of ours for quite a while. I'd say you have a really great, candid approach, that customers enjoy. The one challenge for that with me is that I'm not always sure what you're going to say, but I know it's always relevant and challenging and interesting. And I know, like all of us, really, you prefer a face-to-face, meeting and conversation, and everything has to be done virtually these days. But hopefully, we'll be getting back to that soon. So thanks, Julian, for your time and welcome. And that leaves me with you, Craig. So, and I'll use an analogy. So Craig, I view as this person where there's like fog in the contact center, and Craig arrives in his bus with these great big fog lights, and Craig gets people on the bus and he takes them to their destination. He gets them over the bridge, if you like, into the clear quickly and safely. And so I always enjoy working with you, Craig, and I know our customers do as well. So welcome this morning. So introduction's done. I think if we start with a question, and maybe Natalie, it would be sensible to start with you in terms of the sort of wider market experience. And the current, I suppose, constant is certainly that the future remains uncertain. So thinking about the wider market, what have been some of the things that you've seen emerge over this past year?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on, Dave. The future certainly is uncertain, as the last 12 months have taught us. But I think for us, probably what the last year has taught us above everything is that business models can change, and they can change overnight. And actually, that's really great, because some of the things that have been holding organizations back in the past, actually, we've realized they're kind of self-imposed boundaries and limitations. If you think about the customer experience space, how many of us have been dipping a toe in the water around work from home agents? And yet suddenly last year, overnight, all our agents became work from home agents. And I think what's really great is that many of these changes that we've seen in the last 12 months, I think are really here to stay in some way, shape or form. And we've seen three really big trends emerge. And these are trends that are driving organizations forward. They've driven them through the pandemic, and I think will continue to drive them going forward. And that is, every organization is relentlessly focused on the needs of addressing the everything customer in an always-on business, supported by an on-demand workforce. Now, if you just take each of those individually, the everything customer, well, we've known for years that the customer is king and they hold the power. And even during the pandemic, when things were crazy, customers still remain very, very demanding. And really, they want it all. And what they want today is different to what they wanted yesterday. And it's certainly going to be different to what they want tomorrow. But customers are in control, and they want to compose experiences that matter to them, because things like Alexa devices and Siri on their phone have made it possible for them to pretty much dictate how they want to interact, when they want to interact, and what kind of experience they want. So I think that's a massive thing that is driving organizations both now and into the future. That really comes to the second point, which is the always on, always connected business. You know, I think every business now has realized that they have to be always on because their customers are always on. When you look at what's happened in the pandemic, 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. is prime shopping time. Now that's pretty much the converse of most organizations' normal business operating hours. So there's this big need to focus in on the customer and align the business, every part of the business around that. So a great example that we've seen coming to the fore is the fact that this divide between front and back office, that can no longer be in place. One of the biggest issues that organizations were dealing with during the pandemic was supply chain issues. That was the number one thing impacting the customer experience, not what was happening in the contact center. So I think there's this flip to realize actually everybody in the organization is customer facing. And that then brings us to the third point, which is this on-demand workforce. Every single one of us knows now that our work is fluid, it's unplanned, but absolutely highly collaborative, and it can happen anywhere. You know, I've got my office in my hand, so there's no such thing anymore as out of office. And today's employees really expected to be able to be on demand at a moment's notice. But that's also raised some of these issues that have come to the fore around employee mental health and well-being. And so I think we're going to see organizations realize that there are implications of being able to address this, you know, these three key trends that need to now be embedded into their business operations.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the points I was discussing yesterday really is that there's been a lot of change in terms of organizations adapting to this. And I think for me, what we can't do is, as we come out of it, and hopefully we are coming out of it, that we go back and adopt those old behaviours and those old disciplines. We've got to keep going forward, really. And I know we're going to talk about supply chain later on, really. So in terms of what's really needed now, what would you say are the real key points for now?
Well, I think really the focus has to be on the total experience. It's not just about the customer experience anymore. Customer experience is in many cases only as good as the employee experience. Those two are intrinsically linked. But the user experience makes a big difference, right? We've seen collaboration fatigue because people have been asked to use many different applications just to stay in touch. We're seeing contact center agents not being able to access the resources, the people, the information, the data that they need. So the user experience is absolutely critical. And of course, that has to be done across everything, every touch point, every interaction, every modality. So it really is this focus on total experience that matters. But I think the other thing that we've seen is that there was a realization at the beginning of the pandemic that most organizations, or many organizations, have this huge amount of what we refer to as technical debt. So monolithic applications that are difficult, that are costly, and hard to innovate and change. And I think there's been a realization that actually, if organizations need anything, they need to be agile, they need to be flexible, they need to be able to innovate on demand. And that really requires a very different way of doing business. We talk about composability. It's a term that comes from Gartner, the composable enterprise, but it's composability across every single part of your organization. Now, composability with technology is critical because you need to be able to take technologies, applications, frame them, compose them, compile them in whichever way you need. And the way you need it today could be different to the way you need it tomorrow. But it's also about the way that you structure business models, right? What's a job definition these days? Not much. It's all about the value that needs to be delivered to the customers being served. That's composability, being able to leverage the right resources at the right time. And then it's also just about the strategy, making sure that actually customers are integral and at the heart of every single thing that the organization does, and therefore focused on total experience. So for us, there's a lot of great things that have come out and a lot of key things that hopefully we'll see driving organizations' decisions going forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we've certainly seen this spike of, yeah, to your point of technical debt. So organizations that found themselves in such a legacy situation and needing to react so quickly. And you know, I think that's very difficult when you have such scale and you have to move so quickly. But Craig, so you're in contact centers on a professional basis a lot of the time. So working at the coalface, what were you seeing customers do to react?
Well, I think COVID was a shock for contact centers in terms, I mean, it was a shock for all of us, right? But in terms of what a contact center does and how we thought we were prepared for things like working from home, disaster recovery, I think if you asked a lot of contact centers prior to March last year, could you get all your agents to work from home if you had to? I would bet a large chunk of them would have said, "Oh, yes, it's one of the tick boxes on our license sheet, right?" But it wasn't quite that simple for most of them. And I think what was weird is how behind the curve contact centers were in general in terms of things like cloud adoption. So compared to other applications, other industries, and I say weird because we love technology in contact centers. In this industry, we always want a new tool, a new technology, something to play with to try and solve a problem. And maybe part of the problem was that actually we had too many of these tools, and they were all in different silos in different places with different ways of accessing and bespoke integrations and their own hardware, etc. So that I think left us a bit surprised. But cloud isn't the only option, but we certainly saw a lot of clients quickly look to adopt cloud. In March, I think it was just everyone, you remember, Dave, so everyone just wanted to get a cloud contact center just to be able to make it easier to work from anywhere. And I think we moved from 1 in 10 prior to the pandemic being on the cloud to 1 in 4 now. And we were setting these things up in days and hours rather than months that you would typically see. So I think technology-wise, what COVID has done is actually accelerated what contact centers needed to do. So we had this stuff on our radar. Like Natalie said, we dipped our toe in home working, we dipped our toe in the cloud. We knew these things were coming at some point, but now we've massively advanced by years because of it, because we had to. So that's been one of the positives, I guess, to come from such a horrendous situation, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I mean, and you're right. Reminding myself of March last year, again, the spike of activity to get agents mobile and working remotely. And I well remember, people couldn't get laptops because the demand was so high. Chromebooks, getting them to work. So yeah, I really did see that acceleration for sure. I think we did as a business. And so today, what's the real focus today for people, do you think? What do you see?
Well, I think it feels like we're coming out of that curve now. So we're on an upward, we're getting to the point of where we're actually further ahead than where we were before all of this, and the dust settled, and we're looking at new models of working. So whether that's remote, flexible, hybrid, and a lot of clients that I see now, especially the ones who took the leap to cloud, because of the way most of these platforms are licensed, you tend to have a lot of features included as a bundle. And so it's a lot of people, particularly the operations side of a business now saying, okay, well, we've got these features. How do we get the most out of it? How do we get that return on our investment? And they're able to experiment more with things like digital channels. So we're seeing an increased adoption in digital channels, not for everyone, but a lot of the time, and the personalization that the whole omni-channel can bring. We're also looking at how clients are using technology to take some of the pressure off agents. So again, one of Natalie's key points was these agents, they're the most important part, and we're putting so much pressure on them to work from home for the first time. I mean, it took me probably 6 months to get used to working from home. We're asking them to do it in 6 hours. So we need to give them as much support as we can, so that the knowledge, but we need to simplify everything, put it in one place for them, and take as much away from them as we can as well, just to let them concentrate on that customer and what they need to do. So we're seeing things, I guess, like gamification is kind of coming back into play. I think that was hyped up maybe a couple of years ago, but it's coming back now because it actually helps with some of the heavy lifting in terms of performance management and visibility, and automate some of that. And things like speech analytics, it's helping to identify vulnerable customers, which are obviously going to be now on the increase, without so much burden being on employees of another thing to check whilst they're on a call to a customer.
And I think, yeah, it's a great point, isn't it? The breadth of functionality in these cloud platform licenses means that you can do things like POCs so easily and so quickly. So the digital journey becomes sort of more active and relevant. And I think we've really seen a lot of activity around automation, I suppose, so automating the repetitive tasks. And we were always doing that, but it's just become so much more relevant to take the burden from agents who, in certain sectors, are burning out with at certain points in the pandemic. So thanks, Craig. So Julian, thinking of retail specifically and Hillary's, I mean, did you have a master plan waiting in readiness? How did the situation unfold for you?
Yeah, I'd love to say that our BCM had got a pandemic response already on the shelf to come, but that wasn't true at all. We weren't prepared for the fact that for 3 months we couldn't trade in home, and what we've come through to now. So, no, I think picking up some of the points already made, Natalie talked about we'd all got a home working trial. Well, that was true at Hillary's. We've been home trialing 4 members of staff for about a year and getting used to it and thinking I couldn't see that going much further. My word, how that changed. Craig talked about the fact that things have accelerated, and certainly in investments which normally would have had to wait their turn in a life cycle, they're accelerating a lot more. But we ended up valuing also what we had, because I have to say, when you're in that sort of situation which you've not planned for, we were quite fortunate in terms of an in-house team, a partner we can work with, and technologies that were quite loosely coupled and allowed us to reconfigure those to be far more nimble to that situation than I think we'd expected. So I can't say that was anything strategic, anything we planned, but that reconfiguration, what we had. So our contact center was using thin clients, and okay, we need to do some work to rapidly deploy those to home base, but at least it meant that we had the equipment, because as you and Craig have already mentioned, nobody could get their hands on laptops. So it's very much a case of using what you had, and actually in the process finding it stretched much further than we anticipated.
Interesting. And in terms of business now then, and how that's worked out, how are things?
Yeah, if I tell you that we're quite a seasonal business, usually November week 4, week 5 is our peak week, and the last 6 weeks have all been at that peak week volume. So business is strangely good. Global supply chains are still fairly broken, so that's not making life easy, but certainly business is good, and in some ways that's not helping, because it doesn't actually help you to quickly put in some of the changes that we'd like to do, because we've gone from feast, well, from famine to feast very rapidly. I'm not knocking it, but things like advertising, we've switched off advertising. We don't need to drive any more advertising at the moment because we've got more than enough business coming through. And I have to say, when you look at cost per lead, that changes quite significantly when you're not doing any advertising for a bit.
I can imagine. Well, and that's fantastic to hear. And I suppose so you're busy juggling the priorities, presumably, in terms of you're very busy, as you say, but you need to work on the high priority things. And what would be at the top of your list in terms of those sort of high priorities?
So it's fair to say that in terms of our customer base, clearly, whilst we're on the same trajectory in terms of customers moving slowly away from calls to a more digital contact strategy, we still had a lot of calls. And whereas we had talked about where video might play a part, pre-COVID, we couldn't see that with our customer base because our customer base didn't want to interact via WhatsApp or Zoom. Now, and even today, whereas people have got comfortable with Zoom, that's not usually the way that we're finding they want to interact with us, but actually having to embrace that and to find some opportunities. So things like service resolution issues, we're now looking to see whether the fact that we now have got a community of customers who are more adept at using video technology might help us with some of those tools. So there will be some advantages that come through at the same time. In terms of cloud, clearly contact center the cloud we've not done. It's accelerated our plans there. But the flip side of that, in terms of PBEX in the cloud, I'm probably now further away from that than I was before COVID. It's not a case of an inexorable shift of everything goes to the cloud because you look at the costs, they don't all stack up.
Sure. Well, and I just love hearing Julian, that you're doing well. I mean, I love these sort of success stories, and that your agents are busy and so forth. So that's really great to hear. And I was going to bring MJ in here really now, MJ, because your background in terms of travel and hospitality, we all know it's been very badly hit. I heard a glimmer of positive news on the radio yesterday about people coming back and jobs being created. There have been a transfer of skills that jobs were coming back. But technology only goes so far. So what impact did you see on the businesses, and how did they react?
Well, speaking from our industry, it was really interesting, depending on what part of the industry that we're talking about in travel. It's, we've experienced some, the hotel industry had physical buildings that, had to temporarily pause or, operate with less people, and, all the way down to the cruise industry that basically had all of these ships that are literally still just floating around, and had to find people, find ways to get people home. One, that were repatriated, and two, the employees that worked on all of these ships. And in car hire, if you look at all the airports around the world, interesting. Like most of, we in that industry, we operate on utilization. So you don't think of the logistics of, like, most often all of these cars are out. So all of a sudden the world stops, and you have all of these physical things that you have to find space for. So it's it's to say that creativity and challenges were created straight away. Not to mention all the airlines that were parked places and had to get people back to places. So it's quite, it was definitely and still is quite an interesting challenge. Looking at how technology supported that, basically, we kind of were focused around two main goals, which you've already touched upon, I guess, in some of the other answers that we've been speaking about. And one of them is solving the needs of getting all of the home workers, getting all of the office-based workers for home. In most of the businesses that I work with, there's been a hybrid of home workers and office-based workers. But the challenge the challenge with bringing everybody home to kind of a little bit about what Julian was mentioning is most of our clients didn't have the thin-based clients, or so it was all hardware that had to be moved back, or the laptop issues and all of that, and people working from all over the world actually to get people back. So when you combined all of those fun things with getting furlough, we were the industry that had literally like business to no business. So we had no business, but all of these customers that had holidays, and in the world, usually in our world of travel and hospitality, that if you think about your own travel plans, you book a holiday and you go on it. So from technology support, it was interesting for many of the companies that we've worked with, whereby we had to figure out new processes for rebooking or refunding. Like that stuff actually isn't part of the day-to-day normal world of our industry. So many of you probably have experienced that on your own, for your own holidays, rebooking things that we have clients that have customers that have rebooked, depending on the travel segment, up to 5 different holidays over the last 14 months. And that, like, rebooking didn't exist in many of these worlds. So we had to figure out, how do you get the technology, really, how do you get the visibility on an individual passenger basis first? But most importantly, for the first couple of months, it was, how do you get people back that were in different parts of the world? So technology really helped and supported that. It created, the second big issue that we tried to solve was around visibility for the customer. So, there was a lot of movement. You've talked about this in a couple minutes before, around different customer portals, tracking where refunds are, understanding where things are. That leads to the people part, where a lot of your sales environment, that world became a complete service environment. So that was a challenge in the type of calls and the type of emails and the type of touch points that customers had. So there's a current challenge of, a lot of people have moved industry from some of the businesses in the travel and hospitality sector. So as now things start to open on a retail hospitality basis, a lot of that group has moved on, or is for sheer survivability purposes, they had to work to get that. So it's been interesting, but it's been really the amount of advancements that have come from that is fascinating. Thinking of focus on hygiene and safety. So we now have all these certifications, trackers, interactive apps, different risk levels. Some of the contactless tech, more of that is kind of happening on the grounds. And transparency and control, another really big area for our sector, with digital IDs, figuring out what these changing regulations are. You watch the news daily, and there's like, okay, it's safe to go there. Oh no, don't go there. Stay home. Nope, you can go now. Oh no, you better not. I mean, it's and thinking of the companies that have to service all of the people from those guidelines. They're, all of the people within the companies are learning at the same time that our customers are learning. So we have to have a big accessibility to what that information is. So the good part about that is that has helped when you look at learning and development. And there's been some good, you have a lot of knowledge-based things now that you could look as a resource as these things changed. you know, in thinking of like the cruise industry, for example, that was fascinating that those rules changed all the time, and each of the rules changed based around the world. So you had the CDC saying, okay, no travel for 30 days, then it was 100, then it was you can come here, no, you can't come here. And so, you know, basically, if you live in any sunny destination in the Mediterranean or Florida or around the world, you could see ships, just empty ships, you know, hanging out there. So I've got some good stories there. It's quite interesting, actually. So, but the advancements are amazing. Different VR experiences with, you know, video sightseeing and things like that to get people back and excited about wanting to travel again, because that will be, you know, that's people internally will say, I want to, I can't wait. And then others will be a bit more trepidatious about it. So.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like we should probably do a whole webinar on that whole thing, because so many moving parts to that, aren't there? And I'm certainly guilty of rebooking and chasing refund. You know, it wasn't easy often to get your refund, but to think that all of those processes sort of were loose or didn't really exist in a robust way and had to be created is fascinating. So yeah, well, let's hope we can all get back and travel shortly, and the green list gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, exactly. And we answer the question, is Amber okay?
Anyway. So Jason, you and I have talked a lot about, you know, some great winning, you know, retail sector brands, and so listening to, you know, MJ and Julian and in fact Natalie and Craig, you know, what did you see work, and where do you think the focus needs to be?
I think Julian really hit on a great point around just how nimble many businesses found their architecture to be, having probably considered that it was in need of revamping or in need of moving forward. And taking Craig's point, you know, we're at 1 to 10 with cloud, and now we're at 4 to 10. Well, that tells us a couple of things, doesn't it? And it's, as we were saying right at the top of the call, we always feel that when we're in a technology environment and when we're in a contact center environment, a customer environment, we feel that we talk technology a lot. But when you look at actually what was deployed on the ground at the time, and you looked around the desks and you looked around the office and went, right, just how much of this can we now do? It was quite a question, and it came down, and it was brilliant that Julian referenced it. It wasn't just about technology, it was about the team. And that just brings me back to the point that I think Natalie raised right at the top of this. This hasn't been about just the customer experience, it's about the employee experience. And it's about taking all of that experience that we've had and going, right, guys, we're in the trenches now, we've got to really sort this out. And we've seen brilliant innovation from many, many businesses. The use of video chat is across businesses and categories that you would never have previously suggested would have even thought about it. One of my clients had been deploying it and been using it for years. Another client who has never introduced it, and you look at it and think, well, what more could we do there? And it's fascinating, as you said, Julian, about the servicing of the future servicing models may well hook into some of these video changes that have now come through. So you can imagine that time when you've got a call to your engineer, and rather than having a chat over the phone or booking a web chat, you're getting told, well, do you mind just showing me what it is that it's doing? And you're holding your mobile and having a little look at it. All of those things that we knew were there, we could say that were there, and we had case studies of minutiae where people had used it. We're now seeing it at such scale that perhaps had not been considered. But yeah, it's been fascinating to see the journey. And I think all of the conversations come back to two things for me, and it's the correlation between our colleagues and their resilience, which I think has been stunning throughout the industry and throughout the challenges that we've seen. There are so many people, and just watching that journey through the last 12 months of so many people coming out of role, going into unknown areas, switching, as you said, MJ, between hospitality into wherever they could survive. And you know, we're now seeing the reverse of that. Hospitality is starting to open up. We're seeing attrition across a couple of the teams I work with now, where people who have stepped into a customer experience environment from hospitality are now thinking, right, my core is now reopening, let me get back out there. And it's about how are we going to engage those colleagues that joined new areas and new categories to survive? How do we keep them with us? How do we keep that engagement on their future now? So technology, I think, yes, plays a huge part of it, but it's also the environment that we can provide for our colleagues and how we can drive that forward. And no more so than when we talk about hybrid and home working. You'll know, Dave, that years ago, about 15 years ago now, we started home working in a business I worked with at the time. We had 150 home working agents, and we ran that successfully, and we still continue. They still continue to run that successfully. I think the key point here was that all of a sudden it was an always on and everybody on home working solution. Everybody therefore looking and going, right, what does that mean? And it wasn't about the Chromebook or the laptop. It was often about the environment that you're in. What is the infrastructure of every colleague's home, and does it permit a really robust and useful home working environment for the future? Is it something that we feel is right as an environment for the future? Does the colleague feel comfortable that we are imposing in their home and taking that space and that footprint that might be needed for home working? And then the combination of that, obviously, with homeschooling was just a, wow, nobody ever considered that being the need, did they? But yeah, what a journey we've been through. I think if I look to come back to a couple of things that I take from this, it's about the resilience that our industry and our people have shown. It's about the passion they showed at the initial point of in the trench trying to resolve the issues, and the trust that they put in the leadership, actually, to say we trust we're going to be guided in the right way. And that, I think, has helped with a natural anxiety around where will I move to in the future and what will that look like? Is it that I am right to be back in the office and working with a couple of great clients at the moment, doing everything they can to ensure everybody feels comfortable back in the office now and starting to open up, and you're getting the face-to-face meetings happening, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks ourselves, and it's feeling like it's a restart. It really does feel like we are moving through now, but it's this point now where we are stopping and refocusing. Take the opportunity that this break has given us to come back and reflect on the great successes, the nimble response, Julian, you described it as, where the team were able to deliver so much more than we expected. So refocus, redefine, and then co-create what that future looks like with your colleague base. Because the core for me is ensuring you bring the colleagues with us as we move it forward. And it's absolutely, as Natty was saying, it's not about the customer experience or the employee experience. It needs to be around the customer journey, and it needs to be one journey that we take the team through. So fascinating to see where we go over the next few months, but really, really surprised, impressed, amazed with some of the great innovations we've had over the course of the past 12 months. And category-wise, anything to do with home, garden, and interior fit, my goodness, what a period it's been, right? We need to call out some incredible businesses that have done fantastic work. And I was seeing lots of challenges around supply chain, obviously. But you look at the natural sort of response to all of these things. Customers were very forgiving initially, and they helped us through because there was an acceptance that everybody was struggling. And that lasted about 3 weeks. And then after 3 weeks, we got into that point of, yeah, that's fine, everybody else is open now, why aren't you? So there's a lot of demand then that we're now satisfying through digital. And how do we then take those digital solutions forward to allow us to have value-adding conversations that are value-adding for our business and for our customer, and that we have moved all of the commodity stuff into simple stacks so that people can deal with it themselves. It has moved digital forward, there's no doubt, but as Craig said, it still leaves us 60% to go. So we're still only 1 in 4 moving in the area that we think we ought to be in terms of technical. But all I would sort of ask and request is that as we all move forward with our solutions, we make sure that we center around two very intrinsic people. That's our own teams and our own people, and it's our customers and their needs. And if we get those two right, we need to remember technology is the enabler, not the answer.
I 100% agree with you, Jason, and thank you for that. I'm just very conscious that we've got a minute left, really.
Yeah.
So we have no time for questions, but the questions that have been asked, and we have a few, we'll create a flip book and distribute those to everybody that's spent their valuable time joining us. I think, Jason, you've summarized it really well, really. And I think from our own experiences and the people I talk to, people have become ever more important, and the focus, mental health, well-being, all those sorts of things have really become important, and hopefully they continue to be important, and the communication and the people development stuff. And then, the demand and experience, the holistic view of things has to, continue. That has to be the way of doing it, combining and aligning the sort of pillars of technology, people, and finance. And the flexibility, and it's really easy to talk about flexibility, but we know there's a lot of uncertainty. We know, you know, the speed of change remains fast. So again, it's back to planning, reviewing, checking your plan, and sticking with the plans that work, you know, that you've learned over these past 15 months, really. So on that note, I'm afraid we have to close. I'm really grateful to all of you, as always, for providing your time and your insight. I hope everybody's enjoyed and taken something from it. And thank you all for contributing.
Thank
and we'll
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks all.
Thanks, man. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.